Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Blodgett, Chief Pittman, I want to go back to a line of questioning that I pursued yesterday with the architect of the Capitol. And the gist of that is, how do we best figure out what happened, why it happened, and how to move forward? The observation that I have is that we need some independent, objective, outside review and advice. I think even the best of us in circumstances such as this are hard pressed to evaluate ourselves, to evaluate where we ourselves made mistakes. Chief Pittman, you were there at the time, so you're not objective in that sense, and you may have done everything exactly right, but the issue is that you were part of it, and so therefore the question is, how can we get to the right overall answers? And so in that spirit, what I'd like to ask is, first of all, just for clarification of exactly what investigations of any kind do you know are underway right now, and aside from obviously the oversight function of Congress itself, including this subcommittee. My understanding is that we basically have at least 3 that I know of. The first, of course, is the General Honore Study, which is focused on the physical security of the Capitol complex. The second is the architect of the Capitol, which is similarly focused on physical security, in which he at least has some outside input through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in their area of expertise. I also believe, Chief Pittman, that you've referred to an internal U.S. Capitol Police review. And so I'll just go with you, Chief. First of all, is that correct? Do you have your own review underway, and are either of you aware of any other more formal active reviews?
Yes, sir. So Capitol Police does house what we call the Security Services Bureau. It's primarily responsible for securing national security documents, as well as our physical security implementation of equipment and or procedures. So Security Services Bureau is conducting an internal assessment. The Office of the Inspector General is also conducting an assessment that would be considered external to Capitol Police. You already mentioned the task force that's being led by General Honore. They're conducting an assessment primarily as it relates to infrastructure, as well as some of our policies and procedures. And then lastly, the GAO is also conducting an assessment of the January 6th event.
Okay, so let me just go to those. So when you refer to the Office of the Inspector General, just for my own clarification, what are you referring to there? That's not the GAO. It is who?
Yes, so the Office of Inspector General is independent of Capitol Police. They provide oversight typically to the Capitol Police Board and some of our appropriators as to the operations, if you will, to Capitol Police. They not only do this for incidents like the January 6th event, this is an ongoing independent review that's routinely analyzing Capitol Police's policies and procedures. And then once they make those analyzations, they then turn that information over to the board and make recommendations that Capitol Police must adhere to ensure that we are adhering to the best practices for a federal agency. And I would just turn it over to Mr. Blodgett in case he has any additional as it relates to the OIG.
Thank you, Chief. The Inspector General is going through and investigating various points along the the January 6th timeframe in the different units, and will be coming out with a series of reports on that. Other than the reviews that the Chief has spoken of, I'm unaware of any other independent review other than the criminal cases that are going on.
Well, there is certainly the overall review by the FBI, which we haven't really made reference to, but obviously that is underway. So going back to the question of adequate, independent, objective review and advice, it strikes me that the physical infrastructure side of this That's a very difficult question with a lot of difficult, decisions to be made at the end of the day. But it is more about a physical structure to protect the Capitol and its inhabitants. What we're really at in these hearings, I think, far more is the organizational structure of the Capitol, whether that structure worked, which I think we all have concluded it didn't, whether the failures were failures of people under difficult circumstances or failures of systems, or exactly where those failures occurred and how can we correct for those to assure that they don't get repeated. And so Chief Pittman, and I would also observe that the architect of the Capitol yesterday observed the possibility of engaging other parts of our federal government who have dealt with similar crisis management situations and have come up with their own best practices. For example, the architect mentioned the Department of Defense, also the Secret Service. Chief Pittman, I've got to ask you pretty straight, because I am concerned about your objectivity, not you personally, Chief, but somebody in your situation who again was, there has a responsibility and obligation, and as you said, friendship with many of your colleagues. I'm concerned about the ability in that context to develop that kind of independent, objective review that I think any of us would want. I mean, it would be comparable to asking a member of Congress to investigate and conclude the ethics investigations against him or her. And, so that just doesn't happen, right? So what do you think? Do you think that we have the right processes in place to get to the bottom of this and to make the corrective judgments that we have to make going forward? Do you see a need for any further review or structure, or what do you think about the possibilities of the DoD and or the Secret Service or some other structure? I think, and I would add to that, excuse me, Chair, I would add to that that Mr. Amade's line of questioning was resonant with me in terms of looking at a more holistic view of this, meaning across the board view where we are not thinking in terms of stovepipes. My observation here is that there are a lot of stovepiping going on and not a whole bunch of communication across the board, and that structure broke down. And in that way, it's not all that dissimilar to some of the critical and tragic in retrospect, mistakes in systems that occurred around 9/11. So how do we crack through all of this, Chief? What's your thought on it?
Yes. So I know that there are the 3 independent after action reviews, if you will, in addition to U.S. Capitol Police's internal assessment by the groups that I identified. It is also my understanding that at the Speaker's request, there is going to be a 9/11 style commission, if you will, similar to what occurred after the 9/11, September 11 attacks. So I believe that those groups of independent evaluators will come in and advise things that we can do in addition to what the external evaluators will provide as well. So I think that's going to be key and prudent going forward, soliciting those from outside of even the organizations that we've named that would come in and provide that independent assessment and review to state how we would go forward, particularly in the long term.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chief.